Well, welcome to the Red Chair. We have Mike Sigal today with us. Mike, good to see you.
Good to see
Thank you for coming to Indico's offices here in Lisbon. You are a former entrepreneur, former VC, currently advisor to VCs and to entrepreneurs.
I am.
Tell me a bit your story. How did it all start?
Well, let's see. I was going to school at UC Berkeley, and I had my first internship at a major company. It was at Merrill Lynch, where I learned how to smile and dial, trying to find clients, and realized I never really wanted to work for a big company.
Right.
And not too long after that, we started our first startup, which was originally clip art.
Oh, clip art.
And then became game development. For probably none of your audience will remember the Atari Lynx, this little tiny handheld colored thing.
Exactly. Which year was this, more or less?
89 was
89.
when we started it.
Yeah.
The first game came out in 91, I think. And the assets of that company later became something called Blizzard Entertainment.
Not such a small company, huh?
I had very little to do with it, but the designers and engineer that we hired to work on our games were geniuses. So they coded the first sort of isometric, the 2.5D
Right.
thing that became Diablo in our offices on, oddly, it was a Commodore machine that was used for coding Atari games.
Interesting. And so what happened after that?
Series of startups in and around technology and the technology analyst business. Raised venture capital a couple of times, had a couple of minor exits, had a couple of minor failures. No one hates me one way or another now.
Right.
Starting in 2010, I was introduced into fintech. By helping the global payment network SWIFT develop their program designed to introduce startups to their top banks. That sort of dragged me into fintech. And that was my career, about to be my 8th startup in small business cash management. When I called a friend, founder of 500 Startups, and wanted to demo my software for the portfolio, and realized that everything was a little bit too brittle. The open APIs, open banking was still too brittle at that time. And so he and my now former partner, guy named Sheil Manat, said, why don't you join our new fintech fund? And Sheil and I became the most active fintech investors in the world for 2.5, 3 years.
With 500.
With 500, we ran their fintech fund.
So you were there right at the beginning of 500, basically.
Well, I was a mentor from day one because I knew Dave McClure, but I became first an entrepreneur in residence and then a fund manager in 2016.
Okay. Yes.
We fully deployed our fund, 88 investments in 26 countries, I think, in pre-seed and seed stage fintech. Had a very good time. And then through that experience, I realized I didn't like being a VC.
Interesting. So let's go back a little bit. And because you went through the 90s and the noughts and so on, what were the changes that you saw both in the entrepreneurial landscape and also the investing landscape over those 2 or 3 decades?
Oh, wow. Well, again, my first view was as a freshly minted, well, not even yet, college graduate when I started my first company, and everyone that you had to interact with, whether it was on the company side or the investor side, were pretty much old white guys. On the other hand, you were in the Bay Area starting in the early 90s and super energetic. Everyone was creative. Everyone wanted to change the world, super diverse. You would do a lot of bootstrapping in general.
There was way more bootstrapping, right?
There was way more bootstrapping.
There was not so much capital, basically.
Well, capital had not yet become the industry that it is today. There were, everything was sold to effectively enterprises.
Yes.
There's pretty much nothing that you and I might think of as a consumer startup. And so I was just in awe, not having had, I was an economics major, but I really didn't have any perspective on business growing up. Dad was an artificial intelligence engineer. And so to see how folks engineered creating something out of nothing was really exciting.
So the spirit was the same as today. It's just that the industry was just basically a cottage industry.
It was
right?
exactly.
A really small group of people, very few VCs, and the funds were small. I mean, I remember even when I was in the US in 2000, the funds were much smaller 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Something I noticed. So I spent a couple of years living in Europe after the .com crash. And it gave me a really interesting view to look at the venture capital industry as it was beginning to evolve in Europe. And what I noticed was it's an industry like every other, which means it expands and it contracts and expands and it contracts. And the lessons taught by prior generations are adopted. No, most of them I think are adopted. So it's, I don't know if this is a conversation you have with your entrepreneurs, but like, why is it that Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins and Benchmark do these giant firms? It's because or giant financings.
Right.
It's because over the course of the 80 years that venture capital has existed, over the 10 generations of the venture capital industry that has existed, is these funds have learned that putting a giant pile of money in with a great entrepreneur is actually a strategic advantage to that company because it scares everyone else out.
Of course.
And right, if there's going to be one $10 billion business,
create the winner, right?
You create the winner. Right. Exactly.
Hopefully the entrepreneur is up to the task, right?
Hopefully
the money part is kind of easy, right? But someone has to actually use it properly.
Exactly. And so when to the point you were just making, if you look back at the industry then, no one understood these lessons that have been learned through the iterations of the venture capital industry, right? What is it? The idea of product market fit didn't exist. It wasn't, I mean, it kind of did, but we didn't really understand what that meant or how do you spot it or how do you encourage it along. We didn't, to a degree, we didn't even understand the role of a product manager, the person who envisions the technical
classical management issue, right? You build something and you sell it to people and you make money, basically, right? I think also the deficits in the companies in the sense that, the amount of money they would lose was not as high, obviously, not even close to what the burns that we see today, right?
Well, at that time, real estate in the Bay Area was actually inexpensive.
Exactly. But not only that, I mean, the salaries were much lower, and I think VCs were not ready either to have gigantic burns in their companies, right? Because the funds were small and it was more closer to a normal business. You had to make money from the get-go, kind of.
More or less.
Kind of.
But you had innovations introduced, for example, at the time. Well, think about .com era as opposed to even the one before. The idea of venture debt was pretty much invented because every company had to build its own cage with its own servers and all of the equipment and all of this kind of stuff. And so some VC would put some equity in, and then the company would go to Silicon Valley Bank, or more usually Silicon Valley Bank would go to the company because they have the relationships with all the VCs and says, hey, we can give you some debt to buy the servers and the routers and all of this stuff, which we happen to know has a nice residual value. And now this is an innovation where all of a sudden there's capital leverage for entrepreneurs that didn't exist before.
Yes.
And of course, our industry changed again when cages went away and Amazon or Google or, Microsoft Azure became a big portion of your capital spend.
Right. And so when did you decide that it was a good idea to move to Europe? Was it after 500 startups?
Well, so I was on a trip to Europe in 2000. I came home. I was at the time a VP of business development for a company, and there was a new CEO that had been installed. And he says to me, how was the trip? I explained, here's what happened. He's like, that's great. we're not going to need your services anymore. Here's a 13-month severance check, which was astonishing at the time. And so the next day, literally, I was on a plane back to Europe because when else are you going to have time? And that turned from what was a 4-week trip into a 3-month living in Europe adventure, and then sort of a penchant for traveling around the world and finding our community wherever I could go.
And at the time, which countries did you go?
I started off, like many Americans do, in London.
Of course.
And then I moved to Amsterdam. And then I moved to Paris.
Of course.
And there was sort of business opportunities and just the desire to experience different life for each one. But that set me on sort of a career path, if you will. I say my career is gerrymandering work to support my travel habit. Do you know this term, gerrymandering?
Like, of course.
Yeah. And so when I was locked up in San Francisco during lockdown, I realized I don't really need to be in San Francisco anymore. And in November 2021, I came to Web Summit here in Lisbon.
So it was your first time in Lisbon?
Well, I'd been to Lisbon once 30 years ago.
Right.
It was a very different place, very different place. But what I felt while I was here was the same kind of energy I remember from the Bay Area in the late 80s and early 90s, that sort of diverse effervescence.
Bubbling. Yes.
Yeah. And said, okay, well, that's it. So that trip was supposed to be a week, turned into 5 weeks. And that was the beginning of the process of moving here.
Wonderful. You did well. We're very happy that you moved here. Tell me something. And you've experienced entrepreneurship in the US and in Europe across many years, and also VC and investing. When you came for the first time to Europe, did you see the obvious differences already? And how do you think what's the status today when you compare the VC market and the entrepreneurial ecosystem on both sides of the Atlantic?
So my first several trips to Europe, entrepreneurship. So I remember when I moved in 2000 to London, I think there were only 2 VCs in London who had ever been operators.
Mm-hmm.
Pond Ventures and Amadeus Capital.
Yes, Amadeus.
Right? And those were VCs who were founded by folks who had actually built companies, and everyone else was a financial manager.
Right.
And I have a vague memory from the States before where pretty much everyone in VC, pre-2000, they were all financial managers as well, not operators. And so I didn't know why I was seeing what I was seeing, but I wasn't so arrogant as to think as the way that the Valley is doing it is the right way. And since that time, what I'd noticed, just like the VC industry follows this path of getting more mature, more professional, changing the nuances with how it operates, same thing with entrepreneurs. So I think great entrepreneurs anywhere in the world want to solve giant problems. They just don't always have the same experience set to work with, whether that's what they've learned, studied, done, the people that they have available to bring them on board.
House.
Yeah. I think
or even the companies that form the role models around them, right?
Oh, 100%. Or the companies that will be their first customers, that will be their partners, right? There's definitely differences in risk tolerances, but I think those do change over time.
I think one of the interesting things you see in the US is that partially because on the structuring of deals, everything is kind of so standard. The financial function of a VC is probably less valued, and you need more of the operational capacity to actually build companies. While in Europe, in many markets, and as VC markets start, you need a little bit of that structure, that financial structure, because the market is not used to what is standard and what is not standard. So you need a little bit more of traditional VC,
Yeah.
which then evolves gradually into becoming a more operator-driven VC. But at the beginning, you do need that, and that's probably the reason why it started also in the US and in Europe with more financially driven people, because you need that structure. Once that structure is standard and everybody understands, then you can evolve. That's a nuance to what you just said.
Have you found that played a big role in the creation of Indico?
Not necessarily Indico. I'd say in these European markets,
Okay.
you see more and more, former entrepreneurs becoming VCs. We have our own Christina and partially myself also that have created several companies. But you also need people that actually standardize things and do the proper nitty-gritty deal structuring, financial analysis, and so on.
Completely.
If you don't have that, and we've seen that in other VCs also, which are only tech people, then it's also kind of hard to make deals happen. But if you also only have finance backgrounds, what happens is you look at the business plan and it's all numbers. It doesn't really, people don't have that feeling for the reality, right? So I think you need both.
I completely agree. When I think about some of the funds that I'm advising, coaching, you do see where you'll have a camp where it's all founders who have been on the founder side of the table during the process. And they think raising money for their fund or operating their fund is going to happen the same way that it happens with a startup.
It's a big surprise.
It's a huge surprise to them, because they don't realize that as a fund manager, you're in the business of manufacturing and distributing a financial product.
Exactly.
Even though the marketing may say you're there to invest in entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the features of your financial product.
Exactly.
On the other hand, you get someone who's come out of banking who sets up a fund and says, well, I've just got this big fund. Entrepreneurs come to me, and the best entrepreneurs don't want to talk to them because there's no empathy with the journey
right
that the entrepreneur has to go through. So, why?
It's the mix.
Yeah. So the mix is great.
We're very fortunate here at Indico. We have that mix. So I think we're in a fortunate position. And so when you arrived to Portugal, what are your first impressions about the ecosystem and what do you think the strengths are? What surprised you?
Well, first of all, I love it, but I kind of feel like I'm based in Portugal. I'm getting to know Portugal, but I've been a kid in a candy store with regards to running around and talking with entrepreneurs across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I think that if you take this entire side of the planet, I think you've got amazing talent. You've got capital that's beginning to figure out how to be VCs. But in many cases, you still don't have the global ambitions that the best entrepreneurs, regardless of where they are in the world, exhibit. Right. So that's not pointing particularly at Portugal. It's just a European thing.
It's the markets that are not fully developed, basically.
Yeah.
All the markets go through that, right? There's not enough role models around these entrepreneurs for them to understand, I have to get out of my little city and really just conquer the world much faster. I'd say where you see that is in the speed of execution, right? That need for speed, that urgency.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't see that yet in some cases, in many cases in Europe, unfortunately.
In many cases. So I think, but I do notice a huge change between, coming here before I lived in Europe previously in 2000 to 2000 now.
Yes.
Enormous progress. When I think about Portugal in particular, I see amazing technical talent, amazing ideas. I think we've talked about some of this before. I want to see, I think Portuguese are amazing makers. They may be more humble than they need to be.
Yes.
They should be better marketers.
Yes, but I think we're catching up fast, sometimes a little bit too fast.
So, well, I mean,
In some cases, people are already becoming very American very fast.
it's not about becoming more American. It's about you've got something amazing. Doesn't the world need to know about this?
Right. Even sometimes the people that don't have something amazing, sometimes they actually...
Yeah, that's part of our job, is to filter through those things, right?
Exactly. What are the major lessons that you looking back, the entrepreneurs that have been successful, including yourself, what are the major lessons? What did they do right, and what should you avoid as an entrepreneur?
So I kind of boil down for my founders that I work with. My view of the world as follows, and this sort of, it covers the entire range of lesson, is the job of a CEO who comes up with an idea is to go get a little bit of capital in order to take a set of risks off the table, in order to be able to raise more capital, in order to take a set of risks off the table, in order to raise more capital and keep going in service of that grander vision. That all of the things that you have to deal with day to day somewhere need to fit into that framework. And if they do, then the chances are what you're working on will efficiently get you to the next step and the next step and the next step. And you have to enjoy the ride.
What you're saying is that people sometimes get distracted by doing things which really do not concur to the final vision of, achieving a set of objectives.
I said that
for that stage.
Right. Exact. But in what you just said, for that stage, for the next round of capital.
Exactly.
Really, really important. Because as entrepreneurs, we often think we're going to go from, down here to up here, this way as a straight line. And we know it never happens. It, goes all over the place. Yes. But if you think about how am I going to most efficiently get positioned, now I've got some pre-seed money, I've got an idea, I've got some conversations with the customers. What is it that my next round of investors are going to be looking for me to accomplish before they'll write me a check? Let me get those done, go raise some more money, and then keep going. So your windows, you have a big vision, but you have to execute in these little windows, and the more efficient you are at that execution, the more likely you are to go to the next stage.
Exactly.
And go to the next stage. So that is the sort of the summary for the entrepreneur view, is that it's that series of taking risks off the table, raising more capital. And the other thing you kind of have to learn is that you really better enjoy that, or you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, because that's going to be your life for 10 years.
Exactly. At least if things go well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And then the other lesson is that every stage of VC has a different set of risks and rewards that they have to deal with in order to execute their business plan, which is what they've sold to their investors. And if you're an entrepreneur that just thinks this bucket of money and that bucket of money and that, but that's all money, they're missing the fundamental point of finding the right partnership, which is you as the VC have a certain set of things you promised. And when you talk to an entrepreneur, you have to make sure that that entrepreneur fits to the vision that you sold your investors as well.
Precisely.
So the entrepreneurs need to understand the VC business.
Exactly. Partially, do you think that what happened in the last decade, now we're going through a slump, and I think it's much harder, obviously, to raise nowadays. Do you think that, the excess of capital led to many VCs, on one hand, doing, lots of investments they shouldn't have, and also the entrepreneurs choosing poorly the type of VCs they should have on board, namely choosing just based on valuation rather than the right partners, which will be your shareholders, right?
Yeah.
Your partners in the business, basically.
They're the partners that you're sitting across the table from now when you are facing,
I'd say
less than 3 months of cash.
On the same side of the table, right? Theoretically on the same side of the table.
Well, look, I think if you want to talk about the last 10 years, you almost can boil it down to what the cost of capital was.
Yep.
right? And how much came into the system. And whether you were a VC or an entrepreneur, you did some things based on that cost of capital and how it made capital available for doing smart shit or stupid things. So I'm not. The way that you posed it was, were they doing silly things? I think they were doing perfectly rational things, given
to
the
those
cost.
incentives.
Right. Now, they were not always explicit, but they are almost always there.
There was silly stuff that was done, which was basically a set of incentives because the cost of capital was so low, right?
Yes.
And suddenly now we're in a different situation where LPs have to choose and VCs have to change, and entrepreneurs need to understand that, things have changed also. But does this actually, for a number of entrepreneurs that have only lived through, basically grew up in the last decade as entrepreneurs.
Not just entrepreneurs.
Not just entrepreneurs, most VCs actually.
Many, many VCs.
Most VCs. Yep. How does this affect, can people actually, swallow the reality pill now?
Well, I mean, look, you always like investing in entrepreneurs that know how to pivot their thinking, right?
Exactly.
That they can adapt with the world, that the world as it's presented. So the best entrepreneurs hopefully sought out advice even before things got bad and said, all right, well, we're going to cut our spending by half, and we're going to make sure we have 24 months of cash, and we're going to do less, and we're going to do it better, and we're going to spend more time on our burn efficiency than on our growth rate, things like this. VCs will help tell their companies, here's what we think you need to look at in order for you to be able to raise your next round. The subtext being, if you don't do that, we have to choose which of our portfolio companies we can afford to put more money in.
Exactly.
Right? So the folks who adapt to the new reality the fastest, the best, are the ones that are going to survive or are going to raise for their next deal or whatever it may be. And, history tells us that these vintages
are the best to invest.
Are the best.
Or to start a company, right?
Exactly.
To have less competition as well.
That's right. And interestingly, I think that's even more pronounced in Europe. I was just looking at some data recently that effectively for investors, the best value globally right now, talent versus capital requirements versus valuations, all of this is right where we're sitting.
Sure.
So it's a great time.
Not by chance that you're here. Thank you so much.
That was just lucky. I didn't predict it.
Thank you so much for coming in and sharing.
Hey, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
See you another day.